Hi, in this video we're going to take a look at how to use DeliverPoint inside of a SharePoint site for contextual permissions reporting and permissions management. So we are going to navigate into the Sales Hub inside of my environment, and we are accessing this site as a site owner and will therefore see the DeliverPoint menu items appearing inside the site, also inside of the lists and the libraries, and also against the folders and the items. So let's first of all just take a look in the top right hand corner where we've got some of those DeliverPoint shortcut menu items. The very top one here is the DeliverPoint menu, and that is going to open up the full DeliverPoint experience. So you'll notice in here that you get a lot more reports, you get a lot more actions that can be performed on the site that you're managing, which is here the Lightning Tools sales site. But if you have permissions of site owner rights or site collection administrator rights on other sites or site collections, you'll also be able to manage those as well from the tree view, which you can click in the top left hand corner here. But before we explore this fully, what we're going to do is just jump into some of the other reports that can be just a single click away from that context menu. And you'll notice, first of all, we've got a Discover Permissions report, which is, like I said, one click away. We can click onto that and see everybody that is permissioned within inside your SharePoint site. Now this report specifically is just looking at the site. It's not looking at the lists, it's not looking at the libraries, the folders, the documents, or any SharePoint list items. We can produce a report which is available through the main DeliverPoint page, which does include all of those items, but the purpose of this one is to directly replace the standard SharePoint permission report that we're used to using for the site specifically. So let's just get used to the Discover Permissions report, and we'll look at how we can use that against the site, also against items and folders and the library itself, and then we'll jump into some of the other reports as well that will include a larger scope. So first of all, when we've got the Discover Permissions report open, you'll notice on the far left hand column is the site that we're reporting on, and the site name is repeated for every row, and the reason for that is because it is possible to run a Discover Permissions report on more than one site, or also on lists and libraries as well as sites as well. We then have the username column, and this is the username, the end user who has permissions granted in some way to this site. And we'll list every single one of those users, and those users may appear more than once if they've been permissioned in more than one way. We can hover over each of the people cards in order to be able to see a little bit more about who that person may be. We can expand that people card to see the likes of their email address, who they report to, and any other information that is available as well. You'll also notice that other accounts that our external users will appear in italics. So as we scroll through here, there's an example of Brett Lonsdale appearing in italics, whereas there's also a Brett Lonsdale that doesn't appear in italics. So any account name that does appear in italics is an external guest user. And you can see here that this particular permission was granted by sharing this site with the Gmail account, but they didn't access it via the Gmail account, they accessed it via another external account, which may have been a Microsoft account. So that's the email contact. So of course, if we want to reach out to that person and try to establish as to whether they still need permissions to our site or not, we'd be able to do that. So that's the person column, and we can sort as well as filter on the person column as well. And this is great for actually being able to highlight the duplicate accounts as well. If we just take demo user 9 as an example, at the top of my report, we can see that they have read permissions, they also have edit permissions, as well as the web only limited access. And as we expand the permissioned via column for each of those three rows, you can see that each one of these actually was granting permissions in a different way. So the web-only limited access was actually granted through a sharing of an item inside the site. If you're not familiar with web-only limited access as a permission level, if you can think of it as this way, let's just assume that your neighbor was giving you permission to be in their kitchen. So you could use whatever you want inside their kitchen as far as their cooker or any other appliance, their fridge, etc. But in order to be able to get into that kitchen, there was no direct access from outside, so you'd have to go through a hallway. So in order to get through the hallway, you'd need some level of permission to get through that hallway in order to be able to enter the kitchen. And that's effectively what the limited access is doing. So we're granting permissions to maybe a document or to a folder for demo user 9 inside this site. But in order to be able to navigate to it, they need to be able to access the site and access the list or the library where that item is actually stored. So in the same regards as the kitchen and the permissions are granted that way. So this is an automatic permission level that we shouldn't remove unless we actually remove permissions against the item itself. And we'll get more into that a little bit later on. The edit permissions is a permission level, and we can see that demo user 9 has been granted the edit permission, but not directly. Demo user 9 has been given the permission of edit by being a member of the Sales Active Directory security group. And this Sales Active Directory security group is in turn a member of a SharePoint group called Lightning Tools Sales Members. So that's how that permission came about. And the top one, the demo user 9, this time is granted read permissions, and that is by being inside our Active Directory because the site owner decided to give everyone except external users read access to this site. So demo user 9 being within inside our domain is part of that everyone group, and that everyone group has been nested inside of the visitors group within inside this particular site. And again, we can't really take somebody out of the everyone group because it is everyone. But what you could do is remove the everyone group from having membership of the visitors group if you don't want everyone to have read permissions. So this is how we can read the Discover Permissions report. As I mentioned, you can sort, you can also filter on the username column. So if there was a particular account that I wanted to look at, we could select that account, choose save, and we'll see that account and what permissions that account has within inside this particular site. We can of course clear that filter, and we could also filter on the permission level column. So if we would like to filter on all of the users that have edit permissions, for example, we can do that and see all of those edit permissions in one place. We can also, of course, clear that filter and grant another filter on the permission via column. So we can see here that the sales group had some permissions. So if I start to type in sales or select sales from the drop down, we can then save that as a filter, and we can see that all of these users that are inside this report have all been given their permissions through the Sales Active Directory security group ultimately. Okay, and the bottom one is also worth pointing out. This account here, the Lightning Tools account, is inside accounts payable, and accounts payable happens to be nested inside of the sales, and that's done at the Active Directory level, and then sales is in turn, as we already know, a member of the sales members SharePoint group. And the same thing is applying to demo user 4 here as well. So this is the Discover Permissions report. You can, if you want to, make changes from the Discover Permissions report. So if I do see a user, for example, that may have been granted permissions, such as demo user 6, we could select that row, and it may be that we want to delete those permissions. It may be that we want to transfer those permissions to another user, or we could also copy the permissions to another user as well. So we'll get more into the operations shortly, but just to point out at this moment, if I wanted to transfer permissions away from demo user 6, and if we want to give those permissions to another user, such as demo user 5, we can select that account, and then we can go through and choose what we want to process as well. So you can see here there's several options. When I transfer permissions away from demo user 6 to demo user 5, I can choose whether I'm just doing it on this one particular site, or whether I'm also going to affect any subsites or lists or folder items or SharePoint list items that may also have unique permissions where demo user 6 was granted the permission. We can force break the permissions, which is not a great practice, so we're going to leave that one clear, but if ever you do need to force break the permissions, that means that if the permissions are currently inherited and demo user 6 has permissions to it, we can force break the permission inheritance to give demo user 5 permissions to the same object. We can also support rollback, which is a good practice. This means that we can undo the operation if we want to at any time. And then finally, we've also got the ability to modify group membership as well as modifying any direct permissions. We can omit the group membership changes if it's just a direct permission that we want to affect. If the user is a member of any SharePoint groups or Microsoft 365 groups, we can also include those, which means that demo user 6 will be removed from those groups and demo user 5 will become a member. So we can just run that and that will go through and perform those changes for me. And as you can see at the top here, it's processing multiple lists, multiple items, etc. And it's gone through and transferred the permissions. Okay, so if we were to go back to the Discover Permissions tab here, and with that one still selected, we can see the demo user 6 has the edit permission. Notice how we can refresh this, and we can see that demo user 5 has now taken over that permission level, and demo user 6 has been removed. And as I mentioned, we could also reverse that job too. So clicking onto the jobs view would allow me to go through and select the job. In which case this is job ID 194. I can see that it was the transfer between demo user 6 and demo user 5 on that same site, and we can roll it back and that will reverse the job for me. So once that's completed, we can again refresh our view by choosing Actions Refresh. And now we can see that demo user 6 has once again got their edit permissions and demo user 5 has been removed. Okay, so that's a Discover Permissions report at the site level with the actions that you can perform directly from within inside that Discover Permissions report. The other thing that you can do with that report as well is export it. So if you do want a snapshot of that report, you can just simply click Export Report, and that will export the report as an Excel format so that you can open that up directly. Okay, so let's just close that and we'll navigate now into a document library. So when we're inside a document library, the first thing that you'll notice is that on the command bar at the top here, we also have the DeliverPoint menu items. So there is a Discover Permissions there as well, and as we click onto that, that brings up the same report, but it's focusing in on the document library, and all of the same features apply. You just notice that as we expand the scope here, we can see that we're working with documents as a scope, which is the name of the library, and the permissions are managed by documents, which means it's got unique permissions. Okay, so as we close that, I just want to show you that we can also report on certain files or folders. So let's just close that banner at the bottom with our download, and we can go through and select certain files or folders that we want to report on, and by clicking onto the ellipsis on any of those folders, we can come down here to the Discover Permissions, and once again we've got the same report, but this time that report is spanning multiple folders. So as we navigate through it, you can see that that folder name changes. Now it's sometimes possible that you might see a dimmed name, so slightly grayed out, and that is implying that that particular folder has inherited permissions, not unique permissions. And as you do filter or sort on some of these columns, you'll notice that it's going to show you what permissions that user has to each of those folders that were selected. And here's an example actually of the dimmed name. So sales strategy is clearly inheriting permissions, whereas the others have unique permissions. Okay, so that's the Discover Permissions report. And what we're going to get into now is a slightly different report. This is the Sharing Links report. So the Sharing Links report is highlighting anything that does contain a sharing link, and that could be a list, or it could also be a folder or an item. So inside of your site, when we navigate to a document library, it's possible for anybody with edit permissions to actually go through and share something. So notice I can click the ellipsis on this document here, and I can choose share, and this allows me to generate a sharing link. And the sharing link can be of different types. So you'll notice there's anybody with the link, or there's people in this domain with the link. There's people with existing access, so I'm just basically giving them a link, not breaking permission inheritance. And we've also got specific people. We can choose what permissions the user can do. So in this particular one, I'm going to choose can view, and we'll click apply. and we'll choose who is going to get that permission. So we could grant that to several different people. I'm just going to choose a few at random, and we'll also include a guest user in here as well. Okay, and once I've done that, I'm going to hit copy, which will create the sharing link. And of course, I could usually hit send as well, and that will email that person with the link too. So we've just generated that now. And what I'm going to do is deselect that, navigate back up to the home page of the site, and you'll notice from the home page that we can actually choose the sharing links report. And the sharing links report will show us any list or any folder or item in this site where a sharing link exists. So you'll notice that there's the client's list has a sharing link, as does the company's item. The document item has two different sharing links. One is with anybody, so anybody with the link can edit, but I've just shared with specific people, so these users here will be able to read the link that has been provided. So it may be that I don't want this one to be occurring. I don't want anybody with a link to be able to edit that particular document, so I can highlight that row and I can choose remove sharing links, and that will remove it for me immediately. So nobody else other than these three users actually has a sharing link on that particular document, as we can see from this report. And again, this report allows me to export it, and there's a couple of columns also to point out on the right hand side here. We can see if that item had an expiration date for the sharing link or you were blocking download, that is going to be illustrated in here as well. Okay, so that's something you can run at the site level, and just like the Discover Permissions report, you can also run the sharing links report inside a library. So we can run the sharing links here and just see what inside the library has a sharing link, and we can also select certain files or folders and run the sharing link report on those selected files or folders. Okay, so that's two different types of reports. We've got the Discover Permissions, which is more about direct and permanent permissions. We've also then got the sharing links, which could be temporary as well. But what we're also going to take a look at is the Permissions Summary report. And the Permissions Summary report is basically giving us a good idea overall what's going on inside this site as far as permissions is concerned. So you'll notice in here that we've got some options before the report actually gets generated. So we can choose a unique objects count. So objects can refer to a site, it can refer to a list or a library or a folder or an item. So if it's got broken permission inheritance, it's going to be included inside this report, and we're going to get a count of how many items or how many objects actually have unique permissions. We can also see the top scopes with the most unique objects. So if there's a particular library that has a lot of files and folders with broken permission inheritance, that's going to show up at the top of that report as being the object with the most unique objects. We can also show the sharing links count, so how many sharing links are inside the environment. The top scopes again with the most sharing links, and then we also have show objects with empty role assignments, which means that there's nobody permissioned on those items. And then finally we've got show the top scopes with the most unused sites or files, which we can also include. And for that particular option we get to give a date range, so this is providing us with the current date minus 182, so in other words going back 182 days. So when I hit generate, that's going to create that report for me. And what you'll see in here is we've got the count as we asked for, we've got the unique top scopes, and we've got the unused objects as well. So right at the very top of this report, we can see what unique sites there are. So there's the subsite called regions as well as the site that I'm on that both have unique permissions. We can also see the lists with unique permissions, so they are all there. And likewise with items. So in here, these are all the folders or the documents or the list items with unique permissions. And finally, we've also got the sharing links as well. So we can get to that sharing links report from that permissions summary. Now, each of these reports, we can also drill in further too. So if I go back to that unique objects, You'll notice in here that we've got several different items with unique permissions. If one of them concerns me, I can click it and we can then report on that with any of these reports. So discover permissions may be the one that you want to run to see who is permissioned on that commission sheets folder. The other type of report that we might do is by choosing something like an item here and the site that contains that item, and then from the reports menu we could actually compare the permissions, and that will tell us what is different about the permissions within inside the site and the commission sheets folder. And based on that information, we may decide that from the actions menu that we reset the permissions inheritance, which we can do also on that object. So we would do that by having this one item selected and then choosing actions, permissions management, and inherit permissions, which will put it the same as the Lightning Tools sales site that contains it. Okay, so that's how we can use the permissions summary to get an idea as to what is going on inside of the permissions for this particular site. So the reports that you run, we've seen how we can access those, and as we go into the main DeliverPoint page, the Lightning Tools sales site is still selected as the scope, and from the reports menu you'll see that there's other reports as well that we can run, including things like the unique objects, sharing links, discover permissions, etc. And there's an advanced version of the discover permissions or of the sharing links, and one of the reasons for the advanced version is to provide upfront filtering before the report runs, and also to include other objects. And I'm going to choose the first 5 checkboxes here as my settings, and that is basically going to include anything with unique permissions inside the same report, and also show me the folder structure for those items as well. So I'll have all of those selected. I'm not specifically interested in seeing items that inherit permissions, because when they appear inside the permission report, they're basically going to have the same permissions as the object that they inherit from. We can, as I mentioned, filter. So we could filter on the scope, we could filter on whether the account is external or not. We could also filter on the permission level, as well as the display name for the user, and so on. I'm going to leave the filtering out of it. I'm just going to hit generate, and what you'll see here is that we get the site permissions, not just for this site, but also the region's subsite that also has unique permissions. And as we scroll down, we can also see list permissions for those lists that do have broken permission inheritance, and then the same for the items. So all of the items with broken permission inheritance are showing in the same place. And if we again want to export that, we can do so. We can even save it as a template. So when we choose save as template, and I'll just call this Sales Hub Permission Report, we now have a report that we can run whenever we want from the list of templates. So the way that we would do that is by going to Reports, Report Templates, select the report template that we want, and hit generate. We don't have to be concerned about setting the filters in place or setting the scope for that report. Okay, so that's how we can work with the contextual reports inside of DeliverPoint, as well as some of the management options from within inside those reports as well. What we're going to get into in the next video is how to centralize the permissions management. So that is going to be using the tree view in order to be able to change the scope for the reports that we're running, so that we can actually report against multiple sites or multiple site collections as different scopes. So for now, thank you very much for watching.